so over my head, Wendy. It was like, I can't even begin to tell you. Like, here's what I learned from it. It's okay not to know everything. You just take a breath, you find someone who knows, you ask for help, and you figure it out.
What happens when a woman steps into the White House, serves 2 presidents, leads at Harvard, and still faces moments where she questions everything? Today, we're diving deep into the reality of women's leadership with Betsy Myers, former White House official, Obama campaign COO, Harvard leadership expert, and founder of the Center for Women at Bentley University. She's discovered the hard truths about what it really takes to rise and thrive as a woman in leadership. From the Clinton administration to the Obama campaign, she's learned why.
We don't need more mentors, right? We need more sponsors, because we need more sponsors to break down the doors and to make the phone calls.
When you're in your authenticity, your true self, you are sharing those gifts with the world. Yes, have we made progress for women in leadership? Yes, but are we there where we need to be? No. So in the meantime, how do I look at my behaviors and what are the behaviors that I'm doing that keep my feet stuck to the floor?
If you've ever felt like you're not enough or wondered why the leadership playing field still isn't level, this conversation will change how you show up. Because as Betsy Myers, author of Take the Lead, reminds us,
the biggest thing is just to give yourself grace. And you are worthy. You're worthy of success. You're worthy of love. You're worthy of all the things that you want and in your life, and to stop being so hard on yourself.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of X Factor Marketing, where we spotlight the people and stories transforming lives through marketing, branding, leadership, and their personal X Factor. In today's episode, we're diving into a powerful conversation about leadership, impact, and the unique path women are carving in today's world. My guest is a trailblazer who served in the White House, led at Harvard, and continues to inspire as a voice for women in leadership across the globe. We're going to talk about what real leadership looks like, how women can show up fully in their power, and why authenticity isn't just a buzzword, it's a game changer. If you're building a business, leading a team, or just wondering what your next bold move should be, this episode is for you. Betsy Myers, thank you for being here, and thank you for being a part of my world and for helping so many of us women leaders at EXP. We're so happy that you just inspire us every day.
Oh, Wendy, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful journey to see the growth since you've come on to EXP, the difference it's made in the WIN and the Women's Impact Board. And anyways, it's been a pleasure working with you all.
Oh, well, we are so lucky to have you as sort of part of our community. And that would lead me to sort of like an opening question. What led you to want to work with helping women in leadership?
You know, Wendy, it's interesting because I think about that a lot. It's kind of been my North Star, and it happened when I was really young because my mother dropped out of college to marry my father 2 weeks before her 19th birthday. And she'd been a straight A student at the University of Wisconsin. And so when I was a teenager, she had been a stay-at-home mom. She went back to school, finished her degree, and got her master's in psychology. And she got a job at a local college teaching women's reentry programs. So women who, left school and had other things happening in their lives. And she would come home with these stories about women kind of getting back into their power, stories of women who'd had hard times and went back to education. And it moved me. And I just created this interest in women taking a stand in their lives.
Oh, wow. So, I mentioned it in the intro, right? I mean, you've lived such a fascinating life as a leader. Stints in the White House, stints in, Ivy League education, stints in, the highest levels of sort of corporate America. Not easy places for a female to excel. So, as a female leader, have there been moments where you've just been just like, I can't, right? Just like, I don't even know how to like verbalize it, but like we've all as females like had those moments where we've felt how different it is to navigate the world, right? And feel that gender bias. Like, just what's that experience been like?
I think we all have those days, right? I always say, like, I guess the women's empowerment, women's issues has always been kind of my fascination, my passion, my interest, my North Star. So as each area I found myself in a different leadership role, I always knew it's never easy. Even if you're living your passion, you're going to have skin knees, relationships that go awry, different, you're trying. I remember in the White House, like, I'm trying to get the women to do more things for women, and I'm competing with people who want to do more on crime, more on, foreign policy or whatever. So you're navigating. That's what leadership is, navigating the environment. I would say the context of what you're in to succeed. And so, of course, I always had those days where I didn't get something on the president's calendar, or I got, like, whatever, was frustrated with a colleague or whatever it was. Right. And so, but I think that's part of the grit of leadership, is that not every day is going to be, your best day. But if you just keep on, it's the everyday passion, following your goals, you know what I mean? And so that's kind of, I think, what's always been my North Star, is just keep at it. Don't let it get you down, and I always had lots of allies, so I'm a very good relationship builder. So I always would figure out, how did my being on whatever team I'm on make their agenda better? How do I fit into the bigger picture, and what's the value that I'm adding? So in my early days, I figured out, well, women, and I sometimes don't think women realize this. Women have elected every president back to Reagan. So more women. And so I knew when I was in the White House, for example, I'm this young person, I knew that the president was going up for re-election, he was going to win by a women's vote. So I was always coming with ideas of how, if he did this event or that event, this constituency would help him get reelected. So it's really learning how to frame, what's the value that I add to the bigger picture. And so if I kept that in my foresight, then I could kind of, like, okay, this is upsetting or this is disappointing, but just keep at the bigger picture.
I love that. I love the strategy, right? Because I think as women leaders, we have to be strategic. And I think that what you just said has so many layers to it, right? I mean, you were very strategic in thinking about, how do I add value to, in this case, your bosses, which, oh, by the way, were the president of the
Yeah.
United States, right? Like, you kind of like, just kind of threw that in there in the conversation. But I think in any role, right, to our listeners, like whoever our boss is, like understanding very strategically the value that we bring, and then positioning that value is an important part of leadership at every single level.
Absolutely. I always think, how do you be authentic and strategic?
I was going to, you said the authentic word, and that's exactly where I was going, because you talk a lot about authentic leadership. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So authenticity is, I think it's really important that authenticity is when you say, who am I? What gets me to me? Because I always say we're all born with a package of gifts, and our job, our role in the world, and I call this Earth School, is to open that package of gifts to share with the world. And so what does that mean? When you're in your authenticity, your true self, you are sharing those gifts with the world. What happens is sometimes what I call the sticky floor. So my friend Rebecca Shambaugh wrote a book called It's Not About the Glass Ceiling, It's About the Sticky Floor, like 15 years ago. And it's like, yes, have we made progress for women in leadership? Yes, but are we there where we need to be? No. So in the meantime, how do I look at my behaviors, and what are the behaviors that I'm doing that keep my feet stuck to the floor? So I always say that, how do you be myself, but also be strategic about what are the behaviors I might be doing that keep me from my authentic self, right? So that's what's really important. So sometimes people say, well, I just act that way, or that's my authentic self. And you'll see someone being, whatever, combative or whatever it is, it's not working for them. And I'm always like, well, that's not being strategic, so I sabotage myself to be in my authentic self. No, being in your authentic self, your true authentic self, where you're making a difference in the world, you're also aware of the areas where we fumble. And so that's really important, because what I see in leadership all the time is that people will get to a certain level on their natural abilities and then they plateau, right? So it's like then you plateau because you haven't really done the hard work of self knowledge and self awareness to say what's getting in my way. So that's what's really important. It's a two-pronged strategy, right? To be your authentic self, it's also to understand what gets in your way and to step back and say, how am I showing up and how can I improve? It's a lifelong journey, really, to understand ourselves.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think we change as we go through different seasons or different chapters of life.
Oh, absolutely. What you wanted at 30 is different than what you want at 50 or 60 or whatever, because what your life changes, your perspective changes, and you grow as a human. Hopefully, hopefully we grow as human beings.
And as we get in different environments, right? And that different work environments. So that leads me to a question. You were in the Obama administration and the Clinton administration. Which was your favorite?
Well, it's interesting. It was different because in the Obama camp, so I was in the good way to, in the Clinton world, I was there for 6 years, and I was at the Small Business Administration and the White House. So it was actually in the government, right? And so in the Obama world, I was the COO of his first presidential campaign. So I chose not to go into his White House or administration because my daughter at the time was turning 6, and 2 years of a campaign was about all my family could muster. And so they were very different jobs and responsibilities. They're very, both leaders super, super smart, but very different. What most people don't realize is Bill Clinton is one of the biggest extroverts I've ever met. His ability to and desire to connect with people, whoever he met. And we used to laugh that he would work the rope line twice. And they were trying to pull him into the car to leave at 1 a.m. or whatever, and he'd go back and work the rope line. And Obama was more of an introvert. And so he was more reserved and not as outgoing, even though he could do it. So they were very different leaders, yet had a lot of the same philosophies and same background with education and stuff like that. But I enjoyed working with both of them so much, and I learned a lot. The job in the Obama campaign was a big stretch for me. And it was a different skill set that I pulled on because it was operations. And I'm really more of an advocate person. So I took it and I just took a risk and I learned a lot and, skinned my knees a few times too.
Interesting. Well, I mean, and that is a great takeaway, right? Is that we should be pushing and flexing and stepping into taking those risks as women in leadership, which a lot of times we are hesitant to do.
So hesitant. I mean, when I took that job as COO of the Obama campaign, I was so over my head, Wendy. It was like, I can't even begin to tell you. Can I give you an example? This is really funny. I think this is funny. So we're starting the campaign, brand new. I'm in Chicago at a law firm, Perkins Coie, which was one of the president's lawyer, or the senator at the time's lawyer. And so the operations are starting at Perkins Coie, and we were looking for office space. The head fundraiser was working out of Washington, soon to move to Chicago, called me and said, Betsy, we just had the fundraiser last night. We have $200,000 to deposit in a bank. What bank do you want me to deposit in? And I was like, literally, Wendy, I was like, what? Bank account? I'm responsible for that too? And she was like, I was trying to get my brain, right? So there was this silence and she said, Betsy, do you know what you're doing? And I said, you know what? Hold on 1 minute. I made this up, Wendy. I go, Brock's on the other line. Can I get back to you?
You're like, that's a good way out. That'll buy you a few minutes.
I called John Kerry's finance people and had called and said, if you ever need any help, we're here as advisors. So I called them up. How do you manage the monies? They told me what to do. Call this person, set up this. Took me about an hour. Called her back, said, hey, this is what we're doing. Sorry, I was distracted. Brock needed something. Anyways, I told her a couple months later, and we had such a laugh about it after I got my sea legs. She goes, yeah, I thought that was pretty. But anyway, so we just, and here's what I learned from it. It's okay not to know everything. You just take a breath, you find someone who knows, you ask for help, and you figure it out. And if you go with that attitude of let's take a risk because you'll figure it out. You're not supposed to know everything when you're in a brand new job and a stretch assignment. And as long as you are willing to ask for help and be vulnerable enough to ask for help, to say, I don't really know what you do with the bank account, with the, national presidential campaign. What someone else does, someone else has done it before. Anyway, so that's how you just have to be a little light about it and not make everything so, oh my God, like the world is ending. It's like, we just have to figure out what bank account. Not that it's not important.
Yes. Oh, well, that's, I'm sure in that moment, that was probably a little bit of adrenaline flowing for you in that moment.
Oh my God, I'm so over my head here, but I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, you figured a lot of that out. So when we think about the gender gap of women in leadership, I mean, you've had a long time that you've been studying this. And, really, we haven't seen a lot change, right? And I think of my own career, right? I had such aspirations when I think of, starting out in my 20s, of what I thought would change in the world, what I thought I would change in the world. And I look at sort of this chapter, this season of my career, and frankly, I'm disappointed that, when I look around at women in C-suite roles, women in board roles, women in just executive roles, really hasn't changed. I mean, how do we bridge that gap? How do we substantially make changes?
It's funny because I've been thinking about this, as you know, for like 30 years more. And, I ran the Center for Women. I founded a Center for Women at Bentley University, which is a business university in Massachusetts. And I remember I had stepped away from the women's stuff for a little bit. And this is like 2011, 12, so 10 plus years ago. And I remember thinking, we're still at 15%. And now we're probably another 10 years or about 20% in the accounting firms and banks and stuff like that. So what do we need to do? Well, number one, the most important thing is the leader of any organization, the CEO, the president, has to believe that it's important to have women across our organization and in leadership roles, because we want our business to match society, right? I mean, that's the most important thing. So you have to have a leader that isn't lukewarm on it, but says this matters, that we have the workforce that matches our constituencies. And so that is number one. And then to have programs for women in mentoring, sponsorship programs, conversations about when women start having children and they think, oh, I can't do this anymore. I can't have, what a lot of times what we'll see is a very successful woman can manage one kid, maybe two, but the third baby comes along and it's like, oh my God, there's no way. And so companies that have gotten really strategic, like the Lattice program, so you can go part-time for a few years and we'll keep you in our organization, creating flex time, shared jobs, things like that are really shouldn't be cutting edge, but are still in some places kind of cutting edge. So there's things a company can do, but then there's things that we as women need to address. And so those are things like how we feel about ourselves, our self-confidence. That's why I've been studying the imposter syndrome and our own worthiness, right? And why do 70% of us feel like an imposter at aspects of our careers? What's that about? And how do we shatter that? And it's really looking at the facts. When I'm feeling like an imposter, and then we say, why is this true what I'm feeling? Like shake that up. And so to really look at ourselves and say, why am I feeling like this? Why am I not willing to take a risk? Things like that. So that's why I think it's really important that the CEO, the most important, what then the organization can do for women, and then what we ourselves, the responsibility that each of us has to take for our own careers.
Okay. Let's start to unpack some of that. So I've read some research on, let's start with the CEO, that the CEO has to sort of, be let's start with the CEO. So most of those CEOs are men, right? So most of those men, when it comes to picking their predecessor, that predecessor is they're a representative of their legacy. And it's important to them that their legacy is a success, right? So they tend to default to picking somebody who looks like them, acts like them, fits that mold, because then that's a greater likelihood that that person is a success, which therefore preempts picking a female successor because that's a risk, which is often why that CEO doesn't pick a female. And oftentimes when a female is chosen, it's usually for a failing company that's in trouble. Marissa Myers as an example, right? We can go through a lot of examples where the female that is chosen is when a company is in trouble, and the female is then sort of the setup person that has chosen. So like we have these examples where it almost feels like we're set up to fail.
Yes. We're seeing a lot of that today. When a woman comes in
We're seeing a lot of that.
to fix it, and then when there's trouble in paradise, see it's your fault.
It's the female's fault. Yes, exactly.
Yes. So but then you see examples like Mary Barra, who worked her way up at GM. I mean, she's such a great example of someone who started as assistant and just worked up the many jobs to the top and had experience, in advocacy positions, but also positions where she had budget and responsibilities. But yeah, no, you're so right. And I do think that we are still the tall poppy syndrome, which is research out of Australia, that just when we're still in this place of two things. Well, the tall poppy is when women get too high, people say, wait, we can't see women in that role. We still can't see women in a leadership role the way we see men. And we still, as far as we've come into 2025, are like, what do we think leaders look like? Right. And it's like that vision of even in our country, why are we having so much trouble getting a woman president? How can that be? In the most developed country in the world, we've never had a woman president.
Yes.
And so what does the American population, as an example, think about leadership? And is it a masculine model? Yet in the leadership field, we're really seeing that successful leaders have to have both the masculine and the feminine, the parts of them that, the heart, the listening, the care, the empathy. And so those things are
all those qualities.
Yeah, for successful leaders. So, and I find it really fascinating that the Paul Poppy syndrome, we can all relate to that. There's a woman that's getting, successful, working her way up the whatever, getting success, and then other women say, and men, no,
Yes.
that's too.
Yeah, no, yeah,
I'm not comfortable with that.
Yes, yeah, it's really tough. You talked about a couple terms that I want to dig into. You talked about mentorship and you talked about sponsorship. And you introduced me to the sponsorship term, which changed a lot of perspectives for me. And I have some very strong perspectives on it now. So for our listeners, define the difference for us between those two terms.
Yes. So mentorship is when someone is your fan, just thinks you're fabulous, that person you go to when you want advice. You want some, ideas, or you're struggling with something, want their perspective. And mentorship is really important. But the difference between a mentor and a sponsor is that a sponsor is a mentor on steroids, meaning a mentor that supports you and advocates for you. And this is really important because in an organization, what happens to some of us women and men, but women particularly, we're talking about women today, is someone will be climbing up the ladder or getting promotions, and then they get sideways with a relationship, or something happened and they say, Betsy's not ready for that role, but Wendy's my sponsor. And she's, that's not true. Here's why she's ready for that role. And so that's advocating. Or you're sitting in a meeting, we need somebody to run this initiative. And Wendy, being my sponsor, would say, Betsy's the one to do that. She'd be perfect for that. And so that's advocating, is giving spotlight to people's their successes, their attributes that are winning. But it's also really important because sponsors pull someone aside and say, you know what, you've gotten, sideways with so and so over there, and go fix that relationship. Or in that meeting, the way you presented, try this next time. So it's really important because they're willing to do both, advocate, but also and support you, but also give you feedback that's necessary to succeed in the organization.
Yeah, and I think that is so valuable. And and you taught me like that, and really taught me the ability to verbalize that. And I've been sharing that and living that. And I think it's so important. And one of the aspects that I've been sharing with people is that I think women have been told for so long that, go get a mentor. And I think that's all fine, but I think that's very passive, and we don't need more mentors, right? We need more sponsors, because we need more sponsors to break down the doors and to make the phone calls and say, you've got an opportunity, you need to be talking with Betsy, right? You've got a board position, you need to be talking to Betsy. You need a person to do this, you need to be talking to Betsy. Like, that's what a sponsor does for you. And men do that for one another.
Oh,
Women do not do that for one another, and men do not do that for women. And that, to me, is one of the things that will make a change for women in leadership that we need to have happen.
Oh, Wendy, 100%. And companies, when you were talking about the question, why do we not have more women in leadership? In companies that have sponsorship programs, there's a huge difference in it. And where I learned a lot about sponsorship was Procter and Gamble. So they have, when young people come into their company, like I think there's something like 50% of them will become brand managers. So I taught in the brand manager college for a while. And then the brand managers, they're probably 28 to 33 age group. Then they are told you have to go ask someone in the organization to be your sponsor. And that was really, for some of the women in the group, I remember them having a really hard time asking someone that they didn't know or they admired to be their sponsor. But it was a organization that was used to that, so it was really powerful. And the other thing that they did was, their CEO at the time, I'm forgetting his name. He insisted that every senior leader had a mentor who was with the company less than 3 years. He said each of us needs to know what the young workforce is saying. And then he used to always say, we also need a little, this was a few years ago, we also need a little help with this social media stuff.
Yeah, so
But
it's probably good advice.
it's interesting. Back on this very topic, I remember a friend of mine was working at Deloitte, and she was talking about two people on her team, one male, one female, both going for partnership. The female was extremely good at what she did, worked really hard, dotted every I, crossed every T, but was more of an introvert and didn't network or really get out of her working. And the guy, who was very personable, very outgoing, did his work, but compared to her was a B. But he networked with every one of the partners, learned to play golf, all that. When it came time for partnership, they chose him as a partner. She went to them and said, how could you do that? Look at this woman's work product versus, and they said something that really struck me. They said, we can't advocate for you if we don't know you. And she didn't build relationships at all. So it's a piece of our job is to build the strategic relationships with the people who need to know us. And, because that old thing that women do, that we often do, if I work hard enough, someone's going to notice. And it's bad old thinking.
Yeah, it is. We think that just merit alone should get us recognized and promoted, and it takes more than that, right?
Definitely, right?
That relationship.
Because leadership is relationships.
Yeah.
And so really, and that's the other part, back to our beginning of our conversation, which is how to be strategic. You have to step back and say, who needs to know me? Who needs to know what I'm doing? So who aren't just my superiors? Who are my peers? Who are my strategic alliances that need to know what I'm doing? Or how can I bring value to what they're doing so they know what I'm doing to be more collaborative? And that takes a moment to step back. Right.
Yeah. Which I think brings up a good point, is that we're not very good at self-promoting. Like as women, we don't do a very good job at that because we feel that sort of being like boastful is somehow like arrogant, and like we attach a whole lot of negative things to that. But yet men do that in a very sort of self-serving way, and a lot of times that is self-serving, right? And it's something that I think women in leadership have to find a way that they can be comfortable with. But it is an important part of sort of building your value and building those relationships in a way that will allow for advancement and will allow for recognition, that will allow for all of the things that you aspire for.
Oh, again, right? How do you advance if you're not strategic? If people don't know what you're doing, right, then how do you really grow, right? It's really important. So that's why the female alliance is so important, because having other females that you can talk to about this stuff in an organization, but also females that also brag on each other, your fan group girls.
Yes. But I do want to say on that, Betsy, though, is that females are not always kind to each other. And I want to give like all of our ladies who are listening, like a shout out of like, we need to be our biggest advocates, not competitors of one another. Because sometimes we are not each other's advocates.
Oh, that's back to the tall poppy syndrome.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And no, but exactly. But the thing about it is the female alliance is, I would say, the two areas that are most important in women's advancement now are male allies and female alliance. And so how we support each other, and particularly in a place like EXP, where almost 70% of the agents are women, how do we support each other to be stronger, united than we are divided? And where we can be there for each other, because we're all kind of struggling with the same issues. And then it's there we can say, hey, I want to give a shout out to Wendy, or, not gossiping, but going to, things like that. Like, let's not triangulate and gossip. Let's support each other and build such strength in us as women coming together, because we're so much better, united. So there's a real movement on female alliance now. And I think I've taught a lot of webinars. I taught one at EXP, actually. I have a webinar. I think it's on somewhere in the organization, but we did some work on that. And it's one of my favorite topics.
Yes, it's such an important topic. Okay, well, as we could talk for hours, which we often do. We're so lucky that you are such a resource for us. But as we wrap up, if you could give sort of one piece of advice to our listeners who are building businesses and doing all the things as women do, what piece of advice would you give them when they're thinking of sort of women in leadership?
I would say the biggest thing is just to give yourself grace, and you are worthy. You're worthy of success. You're worthy of love. You're worthy of all the things that you want and in your life, and to stop being so hard on yourself. Because I think that's one of the things that we do as women. We're so hard on ourselves. We have these expectations of perfectionism. And so figure out what's the most important things in your life. I call it your A's, that you spend time on your A's, and B's are maybe important, but optional today. And C's and D's, maybe we can like get rid of the C's and D's, and that's what I say is like, that we're on this journey. It goes so fast. So enjoy it by giving yourself grace and love, and knowing you deserve all of the good things.
Ah, that is such great advice. And you give so much to all of us as women leaders. And I just want to encourage everybody that is listening. I hope that I know a lot of listeners have had the opportunity to meet you through our Women's Impact Network here at EXP, or maybe have followed along. Hopefully we're introducing you to some new listeners. So if any of them are, learning about you for the first time, I want to encourage them to go get your book. I loved it. Take the Lead, Motivate, Inspire. and bring out the best in yourself and everyone around you. It's an amazing book. And thank you for
Thank you,
sharing
Wendy.
that with all of us. And thank you for spending some time with us today on the podcast.
I loved it. Always loved talking with you. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome.